I try to get a good night's sleep, and I try to be anxious-free. But if you're asking whether any of those issues are cause for concern, the answer is yes. You mentioned 5 or 6 things. I could probably do 1 or 2 hours on each of them, so we don't have 12 hours. But we'll try to get this in. But yeah, they're all cause for concern. And interestingly, they're all connected in certain ways. You can find connections if you take Ukraine.
In this interview, Jim Rickards discusses various issues of concern, including the situation in Ukraine. According to Rickards, Russia is winning decisively in Ukraine due to its slow and methodical military approach. He criticizes the media for providing inaccurate information about the conflict. Rickards also talks about the failure of financial sanctions against Russia, which he had predicted earlier, and highlights the strength of the Russian economy compared to the United States. He criticizes U.S. policy in Ukraine, stating that it has been misguided and suggests that the situation could worsen due to the White House's approach. Overall, Rickards paints a grim picture of the conflict in Ukraine and expresses concern about the effectiveness of current strategies.
Maybe the most mean. I always tell people pretty much everything you read in the New York Times, the Washington Post, LA Times, Reuters, and others are just wrong or outright lies. It's very difficult to get good sourcing on Ukraine. It took me a while. It took me about 6 months, but I've developed that now, and I've got kind of reliable sources from a number of channels. But the bottom line is that Russia is winning decisively. People don't understand the Russian way of war. They're never in a hurry. They're very slow, methodical, thorough. They put up a great entrenched defense, and then they fight a war of attrition. They basically annihilate the enemy without ever attacking because the enemy attacks them. They invented what they call crumple zones. They'll make a sort of advance, but not in great strength, and then the enemy counterattacks, and they retreat, and then the enemy moves forward. But what they don't realize is they're going into a kill zone, and then they get a massive artillery drone and bomber bombardment and get annihilated with very high casualties. I think there are 500,000 dead Ukrainians since the war started. It's a war that never should have happened. It was really a failure of US diplomacy, among other things, but a war that never should have happened. But now that it's far along, be 2 years old next month. Just to be clear, Russia's winning. Ukraine's losing badly. They're running out of men. I'll say ID has dried up. That's tangled up in the Congress. They can't get Ukraine aid passed through the House and Senate. The Europeans have stopped giving more money. Hungary has a veto. They might get a little bit in dribbles over a 5-year period, but not anywhere near what they need. You see Zelensky running around Davos with a tin cup trying to get money and comes back empty-handed. The economy is a shambles. A lot of the money we give them just goes to pay government salaries to the oligarchs and the neo-Nazis. So there's this idea we're fighting for democracy in Ukraine, which is nonsense. The US is having elections this year. Russia is having elections. Ukraine canceled their elections and arrested their political. Show me. Show me where the democracy is. That obviously doesn't exist. But on the financial side, which I think our viewers might maybe most interested in, the financial sanctions have been a complete failure. About to get worse, by the way. I'll spend a minute on that. But I teach financial warfare seminar on financial warfare at the U.S. Army War College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. And when I did it 2 years ago, in April 2022, right after the war started, I went through the sanctions. It's a small class, about 1,213, all handpicked, mid-career officers, lieutenant colonels, Navy commanders, some civilians, CIA, State Department, and a few others. But it's an elite group. They've been kind of handpicked as the future big brains. I always ask how the old classes are. No future 3-star generals or deputy national security advisors, etc. And the class was very gung-ho. It was right after the war began. I said, just so you know, the sanctions are going to fail, and they'll actually be worse than a failure. They'll boomerang and hurt the United States more than they hurt Russia. Russia will not change Russia's behavior in that sense. They'll fail in terms of their immediate objective, but actually, the Russian economy will be fine. So then I taught the class again, May 2023. And I said, by the way, in the 2022 class, I got a lot of pushback. I guess everyone was going, and that's okay, a seminar style, and you're supposed to have different perspectives. So that's a good way to do it. In the 2023 class, I said, here's what I told last year's class, and I was right about everything. The sanctions had failed. They had hurt the United States. The Russian economy was fine. All the oil or natural gas that Western Europe didn't want, they sold it to India and China. The Russian ruble was steady. It's gone down a little bit, but not much. But the idea that Biden, we're going to destroy the ruble, we're going to crush Russia, not true. I mean, he actually doesn't know what he's talking about. The Russian economy is outperforming the US economy right now. The only economic problem Russia has is they have a labor shortage because their economy is running so hot that it's actually kind of hard to find people to fill all the jobs. But that's a good problem to have a little bit of inflation, not much, actually lower than the US. And now Vera Nabiulina, who's the head of the Central Bank of Russia, says she's the only central banker in the world who actually understands her job. She raised interest rates a little bit just to cool down the inflation. They're on a complete war footing and making several million 155 millimeter artillery shells per year, now over to the United States, UK, Western Europe. Our arsenals are depleted. We've given Ukraine, in some cases, almost everything we have. The UK is out of Storm Shadow missiles. The US is out of 155 millimeter shells. Germany, France, same thing. No 155 millimeter shells left. That's why we started giving Ukraine cluster bombs. It's a form of artillery called a cluster bomb because we didn't have any more of the regular shells. We've given them, I believe 4, maybe more, but at least 4 Patriot anti-missile batteries. The Russians have blown up 3 of them, destroyed 3 of them with their hypersonic missiles. The Patriots, they can shoot down a cruise missile, certainly a drone or other types of missiles, but they can't stop a hypersonic missile. And the Russians have them, the Ishkal missile. So the Russians just fire the Ishkal missile and they blow up the Patriot systems. They're about $1 billion a piece. So there's 3 billion gone. So the Ukraine's running out of cruise missiles, Storm Shadows in particular. Their Patriot systems were either blown up or don't work. There was the famous Leopard tank that Germany supplied Leopard tanks to Ukraine. They went on the battlefield, got blown up. There were just all these images of burning Leopard tanks everywhere. The US actually called Ukraine and said, because we had sent them some Abrams tanks and said, please don't use our tanks because we don't want pictures of the Abrams burning on the battlefield. It's bad for sales. So the Russian economy is fine. The Ukrainian economy scarcely exists. Russia is winning the war, but they're taking their time. They're not in a hurry. Remember the famous Ukrainian spring-summer-fall counteroffensive? It made a few miles. It got like 2 villages, and then they were pushed back. It's a complete failure. They lost half their Bradley fighting vehicles, their Leopard Challenger tanks. Their air defenses are gone. There's nothing stopping the Russians from doing whatever they want. So that's a complete disaster now. So you say, well, how can you make that worse? US policy has been completely misguided. Well, how can you make it worse? But leave it to the White House to come up with a way